and a solicitor. We got a big agenda today.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that my colleague Bernard is on as well, and then we press. Remind me again, *6 to mute.
Yeah, *6
yes.
to mute and unmute. Yes. And is Bernard on? Andrea?
Not yet, no.
I'm going to mute myself then.
Okay. Well, we've got a ways to go before we get to your presentation. So, hello everyone. Welcome to the March 25th, 2021 meeting of the Transportation Standing Committee of Halifax Regional Council. I'm your captain today, Wayne Mason. We have a very long, large agenda today, and we have a hard stop time because of a presentation about rural active transportation at 3 o'clock. So I would ask councillors to keep that in mind as we try and progress through this agenda, because it's going to be very tight. And I've already emailed everybody, but I'll say for the public record, I'm working with the clerk, and Councillor Kent and I, as vice chair and chair, will work with the clerks to look for other windows for additional Transportation Standing Committee meetings, probably one before and maybe one after the next scheduled meeting, because the next meeting has an even larger agenda than this one. So we're going to have to really put in a little extra work. I just wanted to give everybody a heads up. So let's do the roll call. We'll go around and make sure everybody's on and has their mics. So we'll start with District 3, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am here, and assuming you can hear me and see me, ready to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we have Councillor Mancini from District 6?
You do, Mr. Chair. Good to be here with you and everyone else.
Excellent. Thank you. District 12, Councillor Stoddard.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Here and ready to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. District 15, Councillor Russell.
Good afternoon, everybody from wonderful Lower Sackville. Looking forward to a good meeting this afternoon.
Thank you, Councillor. And last but certainly not least, District 16, Deputy Mayor Outted.
Good evening, or good afternoon, all. Glad to be here. Maybe it'll evening by the time we're through.
It's been a long day already, hasn't it? Thank you very much, everybody. We'll move on. So the meeting has been called to order. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes of February 25th, 2021. Do I have a mover and a seconder?
So moved, Councillor Russell.
Moved by Councillor Russell.
Councillor Stoddard.
Seconded by Councillor Stoddard. Are there any errors and omissions in the minutes? Seeing none, if someone would care to call for the question. Question has been called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded, nay. The aye has it. Motion carries. On to approval of the order of business and approval of additions and deletions. Clerk, could you please outline the additions to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. So there is one item to add to the agenda, and that would be item 15.1. And the title of that item is Pedestrian Infrastructure Highway 101 Exit 2.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So what has been identified is that because of our hard stop at 3 o'clock, we probably won't get to this today. But Councillor Russell has noted that if we don't add it to the agenda, it will not be public for another month. So I think what we're asking, Councillor Russell, could you speak to what you'd like the committee to do at this point for you?
Yeah, thank you very much. This report has been a longstanding report initiated a few years ago. And the community is really looking forward to seeing it, and I'm looking forward to being able to talk to them about it. So the idea of having it out there in the public forum is really important. What I'm hoping to do is that we add it to the agenda, and then if we get to it and there is no time to discuss it fully, then we could defer it until the next meeting, whenever that is.
Yep.
So we've been asked to add it, and we all agreed to do that, but recognizing it probably won't, I mean, it assuredly won't get discussed today. So with that in mind, though, I would ask if there was an appetite to defer it now so staff don't have to hang around just in case we actually get to it.
So moved, Tim.
I'll second that.
You're very gracious, Councillor. Thank you very much, Councillor Russell. So moved by Councillor Outted, seconded by Councillor Russell, that item 15.1 just added be deferred to the next meeting of Transportation Standing Committee.
Whenever the heck that is.
So I guess actually we have to finish the approval of the order of business. So I'll come back to that motion so we get that done. So do the members have any other requests or additions to this meeting? Seeing none, do we have a mover and a seconder for the agenda as amended? Do that first.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Russell, second by Vice Chair Kent. Any further discussion on the agenda as amended?
Question?
Question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. And so now the motion, I'll allow the motion on the floor to defer 15.1, moved by Oudit, seconded by Russell. Any further discussion on the deferral? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. Thank you.
Thank you very
So
much,
we have-
everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Thank you, Councillor Oudit. So we'll move to business arising. Item 4, there is none. Call for declaration of conflict of interest. Councillors, any conflicts of interest today? Seeing none, we'll move to, there are no motions of reconsideration, none of rescission. This brings us to 8.1, which is the consideration of deferred business expanded 2021-2022 Student Transit Pass Pilot Program Supplementary Report. And Aaron Blay is here from Transit. There is no presentation or no PowerPoint presentation. Is there a few words from staff, or are we going to move straight to a discussion?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Aaron Blay, Supervisor, Service Design and Projects at Halifax Transit. Happy to be here today with a revised recommendation. Just so everyone's aware of exactly what has changed within the recommendation. Basically, the only wording change is that we amended it to reflect that pilot phase 1 was expanded to include all students from each of the 4 identified schools in grades 9 through 12 or 10 through 12 where appropriate. There was no changes to the bylaw amendments required. And that's about it in terms of the recommendation. Effectively, this expansion would go from including about 500 students to about 2,500 students. So it's a pretty substantial expansion of the program. And it does substantially increase the potential for risk. While the expanded pilot is great in that more students will benefit more quickly, it's going to be very well received by the 2 school boards involved. It'll give us a lot more, I guess, information as we inform the funding agreement as we move into phase 2. There is a significant risk that all those additional passengers could cause overcrowding on some routes at some times of the day. And there's also a pretty big likely that there'll be a larger impact to revenues as described in the financial implications section of this report. Something else that I would like to highlight is when there are passenger overloads, Halifax Transit does not have any resources associated with this program to increase capacity to address that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blay. So we have Councillor Mancini is the first one to clock in to comment, but I'd ask the clerk first. Do we need to put is this a revised motion? Do we need to put that on the floor?
Mr. Chair, it's not it is a revised motion. So yes, you will need to put it on the floor.
Councillor Mancini, I'd ask you to put the revised motion on the floor and then go ahead.
Good afternoon.
Certainly, Mr. Chair. So this is the motion that's on our agenda, correct?
Correct.
Happy to do so. That the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council 1 approve the phased-in student transit pilot program as described in this report dated February 1st, 2021, with pilot phase 1 expanded to include all students at each of the 4 identified schools in grades 9 through 12. And 2, adopt bylaw U108, the purpose of which is to amend bylaw U100, the user charges bylaw, to enable the student transit pass pilot program as set out in attachment C to March 9th, 2021 report. So moved.
Second, Tim.
Moved by Councillor Mancini, second by Councillor Deputy Mayor Oudit. Anything further, Councillor Mancini?
Yeah, just very quickly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Aaron, thank you as always. And you're bang on. That's exactly what our discussion was all about, expanding it. So you hit the nail on the head on that. Does this have to go to council is one question after it leaves here. Then, we talked about the overcrowding as a possibility and a loss of revenue. So understand, folks, and those watching at home, the whole idea of this program is to encourage more transit use, and if we can get the youth more comfortable in using our transit as they get older, they will use transit. So I think this is a very good investment. If overcrowding is an issue, that's a good thing, other than during COVID, of course. But in normal circumstances, overcrowding, that's a great problem to have. And hopefully you have overcrowding on many of our buses, then we'll have to deal with that in an appropriate manner. So I'm okay with as you put them, risks. I think it's a good thing. So my question is just, does this have to go to council after today? And then when does it may have said in the report, but when is it activated? I suspect that would be September this year. Thank you.
Through the chair to the committee. Yes, it does have to, where it involves a bylaw amendment, it does have to go to council. So we would target having the notice of motion at the next council meeting, and then first reading and second reading would take us to May, sort of late May. And that kind of adjusts our original timeline, which was April. So we would be aiming to be in the schools, rolling the program out in the end of April or May and the first week of June, because the schools have indicated that September is such a busy time. They have an interest in getting the passes in students' hands before everyone gets out for the summer.
And one last question, Mr. Chair. So how does it work? Will the students have to register or apply? Does it go through the schools? Is that part of the pilot program? So if I'm a student in one of those grades, how do I get involved in the whole program?
Sure, through the chair. So from our end, it's open to any student at the school pending council's approval. So we plan to manage it through basically having a sticker put on their ID card, much like someone might have an e-pass right now.
But how do they get the sticker? You're going to
that's it, through the schools. Through the schools, yeah.
Thanks, Aaron. I was always really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mancini. I see no further discussion of this motion on the floor.
Question?
Question has been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Emma White.
Aye. Aye.
Against?
Aye.
I hear no nays, so the ayes have it. The motion passes. Thank you very much, staff. Thank you, Councillor Mancini. Moving on. Item 9, notice of table matters. There are none. Correspondence, petitions, and such. Madam Clerk.
Hi, Mr. Chair. There was no pieces of correspondence submitted to the committee for this meeting.
Thank you very much. We'll move to petitions. Are there any petitions?
The clerk's office received no petitions.
Thank you very much. Are there any petitions from members of the committee? Very good. Seeing none, thank you for that. We'll move to presentations. 10.3.1 Equitable Provision and Maintenance of Traffic Control Devices for Blind and Partially Sighted People. Milena and Bernard. I think Bernard, you just joined us, and I know Milena was on the line. If you want to hit star, it's *6 to unmute. And we'll see if we can hear you first of all. So Milena and Bernard, if you're there, if you can unmute both your phone and the system and give us a word. So, perfect. That's Bernard. And Milena?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Oh, thank goodness. Panic attack. Thank you.
In these COVID times, this is just another normal thing that happens at every meeting, so no worries. Thank you both for joining us. Your presentation is up on the screen now, and it's great to have you both with us again. If you want to go ahead, that'd be great. You have, let's see, it's 10 minutes for this.
Okay. First of all, Chair, through the committee, thank you for having us. You can see the title page there. I do have a little bit of housekeeping just so people are aware. Because of the way this is set up for me, and I am completely blind, you may be hearing my screen reader. It's the way that I keep my notes I apologize, but we're not permitted to log into MS Teams, which would keep my screen reader quiet. So if you can bear with that, it is what I live with, constantly jabbering voices coming out of my computer. Clerk Andrea, thank you very much. She has very amicably agreed to make sure that I'm staying on track with the PowerPoint slides so that we're exactly where we all need to be. So with that being said, I may run over about a minute or two maximum, just because it takes me, as a person who is blind, a little bit longer to get through this. If you can imagine, as it also takes a little bit longer to get across 5 lanes of intersection. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my colleague and good friend, Bernard Bissett. Would you like to say something?
Good afternoon. My name is Bernard Bissett. I am a white cane user and have low vision. And I've been involved with this group for a year now, and I'm looking forward to answer all the questions you have. Thank you.
Okay, and my name is Milena Kazanavichus. I am completely blind, and I travel with a guide dog. I'm the talker. Bernard is the walker with his white cane, and somewhere in the internet planet is Mr. Bill Campbell, director of Walk and Roll, who is our navigator. So, forgive my screen reader here. Again, I'd like to thank for your time and for having us on to do this presentation about accessible pedestrian signals, which are consistently inconsistent. We'd like to thank the Council and Chair for last month's passing of the motion to have APSs, those are for the blind and partially sighted, reduced from a 3-second push and hold to a 1-second push and hold. And I will explain what exactly that means, because I can guarantee that 100% of sighted public who are entering intersections as pedestrians, when they arrive at an intersection, push a button and off they go to cross, because there is a visual signal, either a walking man or a hand, or a countdown in seconds. For those of us, and people on the streets, so as I'm traveling as well, had no idea 100% of the time. But those of us who are blind and partially sighted, we have continuously had to come up to find the actual APS, where it contains a locator button, which has a sound of a tuk, tuk, tuk. And then we have to push and hold for what was supposed to be 3 seconds until we are acknowledged that we are there looking for an audible signal. Now try to imagine if you are someone who's blind traveling with a guide dog such as myself. My guide dog and everyone's guide dogs are always being held by the harness on the left side with the hand. In the right hand, you might be carrying a bag of groceries or your briefcase or your coffee. So coming up to an APS, which you have to hold for a minimum of 3 seconds, is not equitable. Nor was it safe, nor was it fair. So we really thank you for reducing that push and 3-second hold down to a 1-second push and release, where we can come up to the button, push, release, and an audible signal should arise if they are working properly. And at this point, they are consistently inconsistent on how they work. Okay. Andrea, if we could have the second slide, I think. Please.
It's up.
Are we there?
It's up, Milena.
Okay, thank you. So that should be a picture of Sir Frederick, Charles Frederick? Is that
Yes.
the correct one?
Yep, we got that.
Yes. Yes, okay. If we could just go back and forth, just so I know that I have the right slides. Okay, this is a picture of Sir Charles Frederick Fraser. At the age of 21 back in 1873, he changed the Halifax Blind Asylum from a place of holding to the Halifax Halifax School for the Blind and Partially Sighted. His main goals were to promote dignity, independence, and equity. As most of you will know the history of the Halifax School for the Blind, this man, who was blind himself, was quite prominent throughout the entire country, worked with counselors and business, and did a lot of changes. His most valued and cherished goal was to make sure that those who were blind and partially sighted, including soldiers returning from wars, were trained so that they could maintain their independence and their freedom and their dignity. And with that, we would like to move forward so that we maintain equity first and foremost, and our freedom to be moving across traffic lighted intersections in a safe and fashionable manner. As it stands right now, the equity is not 100% there. In Nova Scotia alone, we have about 45 to 50,000 people who are blind or partially sighted. That's a pretty significant number. In HRM, all 16 districts, we are estimating as of 2 years ago, probably 1,800 to 2,000 people in HRM, all 16 districts. We're everywhere. Sackville, Beaverbank, Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, Halifax Peninsula. Not everybody is completely blind. If I could have the next slide, Andrea, if you don't mind, please. Is that up? Remember, I can't see.
It's up now.
Yes, Milena, it's up.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so the first one should be macular degeneration.
Yes, it's
that
up.
Should be listed. Okay. So that should be a picture of two children. I think they're wearing blue T-shirts. Perhaps they're wearing orange, and the contrasting ball that they're holding. So this is someone with one eye condition called macular degeneration. Right now in North America, it is the leading cause of sight loss, macular degeneration. Next slide, please. It should say cataracts. Same picture with cataracts, the same kids, and this is what you may or may not see if you have cataracts. Quite a large number of individuals across North America have cataracts. We're luckily, in being in North America, can have them removed within 15 minutes with the laser treatment. Next slide, please. We should have up on the screen the same picture of the two children with the ball with diabetic retinopathy. This is what you may or may not see if you do have diabetic retinopathy. Next slide, please. And that should be the last slide, and I believe it should say glaucoma underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So if you have glaucoma, this is what you would be seeing on the same pictures. So it doesn't mean that every single person has just that eye condition. A lot of people who are blind or partially sighted can have many eye conditions, and their sight may be varying due to the conditions of fog, sunlight, winter, etc. Okay, if we could have the next slide, please. That should be a map, I believe.
Yes, it is. It's up.
Thank you. So in Halifax, we have 76 intersections that have been, let's say, placed, equipped with APSs. 76. 23 of them last year were surveyed by Bernard, Mr. Bissett, and Mr. Bill Campbell on their working abilities. And the map that you see right there, with all the X's, has the X's, so that's 23 of them that were not working. This is what we have reported to TPW over the last year. And I would like to say that we have been working very hard. TPW has come on board with Mr. Koutrelakis and Mr. Roddy McIntyre. Finally, there was a little bit of a hesitancy, but those are 23 intersections that had apps that were working consistently and consistent. Whether it was one button that didn't work, whether it didn't initiate that it acknowledged that we were there to push for a safe crossing, or whether it did not have an audible signal for whatever reason on any given day, and you return the next day and it would be working. Next slide, please. That should be the same map, correct? But
yes.
This is the same, yeah, with X's. 23 of these intersections, Mr. Bernard and Mr. Campbell have gone around this year. This is a year. They have not been fixed with the exception of 2. We have a little bit of a problem here, I think. So 23 intersections from a year ago down to 21, and as a matter of fact, this morning, Connaught and Quimpool, if TPW is kindly listening, there's a problem there to Halifax or Houston. Okay. Okay, next slide, please. That should be a title page by Haley Inglis called Revealing Barriers, correct?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrea. This is And Mr. Chair, through the council, everybody should have gotten all the reports. You will probably want to be reading that later. This is Haley Inglis, who did a research study just last fall. She's a master's from Dalhousie School of Planning. And there were 13 participants who were blind and partially sighted who state the same, let's say, grievances with APSs alongside with other issues for people who are blind and partially sighted when we're trying to get across Shabukto or Bears or Quimpool, and it is not the safest for us to be doing. So it is not just Bernard and myself, but others are here within the HRM as well within this report, and you may read that at your leisure. Okay, next slide, please. So some of our other barriers, I believe this is the corner of Robie and North Street, I think it should be titled.
Correct.
Yes. Thank you. These intersections, this intersection here, these are brand new APSs that have been installed. There is, from the CTA and Clearing Our Path put out by CNIB websites, minimum guidelines on how they should be placed. These are brand new. They have not been initiated as for working yet. The buttons for push and hold on North and Robie are still taped up. The problem is that two of these poles are, one of them is placed 10 feet away from the curb and the other one is placed 7 feet away. The maximum, and Bernard Bissett will be answering any questions afterward because he has all the numbers. He's more mathematically proficient than I am. The maximum allowance as a guideline should be no more than 1.5 meters or 2 feet, I believe, under that, because what it ends up doing is misaligning a person who is blind or partially sighted, whether using a guide dog. Believe it or not, guide dogs aren't always the straightest walkers, and or a white mobility cane. If we get to a curb and we have to go 10 feet away to push a button for a safe crossing with an audible, that puts us in danger and at the intersection. Why this has been placed this way, TPW promises me that they're going to find that out. And thank you for that to Mr. Roddy McIntyre. Next slide, please. There should be a picture of Sackville and Dresden, where a new APS has been installed. Now, this has been installed correctly. The problem with that was Bernard and myself, again, having to clean up a bit of a mess that was made. The actual button itself was one color, no contrast. These do have to be with contrast. Somebody missed the ball on that, but I will give credit to TPW again that it was rectified quite quickly within 2 to 3 weeks. So they replaced the button instead of just having it a gray on gray where no one with partial sight could see and find it. Now you can see that it has contrast, which they all should, because aesthetics in each jurisdiction do not get to override the safety and equity of people who are blind or partially sighted, or anyone for that matter. Next slide, please. This should be an intersection of Robie and Kennard. It is an old view, I believe. This intersection did have APSs that were working on and off, consistently inconsistent. And because of the, let's say, repaving of sidewalks and everything, it has not, these APSs have not been reinitiated. We are still waiting for a minimum of 5 to 6 months, perhaps 4, we'll say, maximum of 6. So they're taped up as well, where they were there before working. They are not working now. We're still waiting on an answer for that. Next slide, please. This is my favorite intersection. This should be Bears Young and Windsor. I have been waiting for 10 years to have this intersection in particular equipped with an APS. There are actual buttons for people who are sighted. It's called a bulldog button. It's quite tiny. It doesn't have any audible on it. So the wiring is there in order to initiate audible signals. And if you can see this intersection, it's diagonal. It's a basket of snakes when it comes for all the roads that are coming in. Imagine trying to cross that when you cannot see 100%. It is virtually impossible and dangerous. And right around the corner, I will not keep on this one, but Kempt and Yonge Street, APSs there have not been working either. I will tell you this, Mr. Chair, through council. It has taken me over a week to return back to that intersection to cross because of the death that has been recently happened, because the APSs were not working. So I had to have a sighted friend come with me to make sure that these APSs were going to work for when I needed to get to the dollar store and to get groceries at the Yonge Street Superstore. Therefore, my freedom and my equity has been infringed upon because of the APSs were consistently inconsistent. Next slide, please. So this should be a picture, I believe, of perhaps Lower Sackville out there, Mr.
It
Yes,
says,
it is.
list of APS device locations.
Yes, okay. This isn't as much of an issue. There is a listing of where all the APSs are located, but they are continuously not being updated. So my walker, Mr. Bissett there again, has been walking and checking things while I'm checking others, has been informing TPW. They have come in accordance and they are trying to keep that updated, but we need to make sure that that website in particular is updated constantly. And I do need to state here, APSs are everywhere, as mentioned before. Lower Sackville, Beaverbank, Dartmouth, Eastern Passage, and of course in Halifax. And I can guarantee you, while I resided in Lower Sackville for 6 years, Sackville and Beaverbank are also a problematic APS installation by consistently being inconsistent, whether they work or they're not. Okay, next slide, please. So what we have been doing on the other side as well, we have been working with Ms. Shannon O'Connell for the complete street guidelines draft. And the first phase has been already implemented or will be implemented. But when it comes to traffic signals, my understanding, and I could be very wrong in this, it won't be for another 6 months or so. We would like to have, if possible at all, a bit of urgency put on that traffic installations and traffic lights gets put on the complete guidelines in the Red Book sooner than later, because having to wait this long in 10 years is not equitable. Next slide, please. So that should be crosswalk and proper maintenance of crosswalks. It doesn't affect me, but I do not only speak on myself. As I have mentioned, there are 45 to 50,000 people in Nova Scotia, 1,800 to 2,000 of them in HRM, who have either complete blindness, probably about 15% of that, and the remainder have some form of vision. The maintenance of crosswalk paint is highly, highly essential. We live in a salted, foggy area. People who are walking with partial sight need to be able to see those paint lines. And we have been told by traffic that painting can only be done above any kind of temperature. I believe it is above 5 degrees constant. That is fully understandable, and we appreciate that. But the maintenance and refreshing of them, more often than not, needs to be kept up. Next slide, please. We're getting there. So that should be, I think, a little red car, perhaps?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Anybody know what that is?
That's
it's
a Tesla.
It's an electric car. Yes, but it's an electric car. Very good, Mr. Chair. So why bring this up is because we have already said, and we are already aware of the fact that our population has increased significantly. Everybody running to Nova Scotia to get away from COVID, people coming in, and traffic is going to be increasing despite what we're thinking once COVID is done. These electric cars are hugely problematic. You cannot hear them. Therefore, proper 100% accuracy and working of APSs to identify that it is safe to cross an intersection must be implemented. If there is a car there and I should step out, and I have done this on numerous times because I waited in a winter storm, I have dexterity problems, so do a lot of other people, having to hold the button for such a long time, and it didn't work, and then you wait a third traffic cycle, and then you step out to cross because you have to get out of the cold and get to where you need to be. If we cannot hear those cars, people are going to die. So it's important that these APSs work.
Elena, we're coming up on 20 minutes, so I've given you almost double the normal time. I'm wondering how close you are to the end now.
Okay, so I'm going to run right through this. Sorry, thank you. Okay, if we could. Okay, next slide. And this is the TP. So thank you to TPW. This is the work plan. You can see what has been written up, and that has been after a year with working with Mr. Kotsalakis and Mr. Roddy McIntyre. We do have a work plan in order that we hope councillors will make sure that it is being implemented. And we are very pleased to see an initiative by TPW in their budget that by 2030, every lighted intersection will be having APS is installed. May I bring up that in Winnipeg, it is a universal design already. They have over 700 intersections because a human rights case was taken to court. Okay, and our last slide, the ask to the committee, and you can see that for yourselves there. The only one I will come up to is number 3, that proper serving as it stands right now. TPW checks these APSs twice a year. We believe it would be more beneficial if they were being checked more often than twice a year to ensure that individuals such as ourselves don't have to be running around and reporting to 311 constantly and continuously. I thank you for giving me the double time. I'm sorry it took so long, as you can understand, trying to work with the screen reader. And we appreciate the time. We thank you for last month's passing, and we thank TPW for working with us as well.
Thank you so much for this presentation. So the last slide we have up here is our ask to the committee. Understand the causes, repair APS devices, inspect and schedule complete streets, and improve crosswalk marking maintenance. So thank you so much for that presentation. The first councillor to ask some questions would be Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we've got a busy jet, so I'll try to be quick here, but Milena and Bernarda, thank you very much for this presentation. Huge learning for me. I have no idea what it's like to be visually impaired, to be a white cane user, to be fully blind. I have no idea, so this is a huge learning for me, and I appreciate you sharing this. A few questions, and some of these questions, it's probably going to be offline with staff, but you just mentioned Winnipeg. So is there a municipality or a city in Canada, North America, globally, that's considered best practice when it comes to the types of things you shared with us today?
Bernard, shall I take this? Thank you, Mr. Mancini, through the chair. Yes, as a matter of fact, in 2008, under the Human Rights Act, because of the Charter of Rights, where it actually does state, I believe in Section 13 or so, that equitable and safe, accessible intersections for all users be placed in where traffic lights are for vehicles. And Winnipeg individuals took that to court, so therefore they have installed every single one of their intersections with some form of device that permits people who are blind or partially sighted and sighted people, as a matter of fact, who have their heads in their iPhones, that you no longer have to push a button. When the traffic signal turns for a vehicle, an audible sound comes on for those pedestrians who are requiring it without having to push anything. Now, we're not going to go that far here. We're pleased that we don't have to push and release. So Winnipeg has deemed itself to be doing universal, not only accessible, but universal designs. I hope that answers. Thank you.
Councillor Mancini, you were muted there. If you have any follow-up there.
Yeah, I do. Sorry. Thank you. I don't know how I get muted. Thank you for that. So Winnipeg is the place to reference. I think you sort of answered my second question. How do we make sure that when the buttons are working consistently? You talked about staff, HRM staff now check twice a year, and you're recommending that should be 3 or 4 times a year. Here's a question, a more general question. Because I'm not visually impaired, when you come to a municipality for the first time, how do you know where to maneuver, what the street the layout is, whether it's a friendly street to your impairment? How do you know that if you're new to a community?
Bernard, do you want to answer that?
Absolutely. For one thing, if they are APS, there will be the acoustic indicator location sound, which will tell you there are, when you get to a corner, you will tell you there are APS. That's one, the thing with the reference point. A lot of time, for example, say you're crossing Kunpa Road right now, I'll give you an example. There are 5 crossings on Kunpa Road, and there are 2 that are partially accessible. And I said partially because there's 2 of them that after you find the button, although you don't know where it is unless you feel around because there's no sound to indicate where the button is.
Right.
You press the button, eventually it tells you there's a sound. But otherwise, when it comes to the APS, that's the way to find out if there's some sound, then you know where to cross, right? As in where you learn the street is that you have to have somebody to help you out a little bit, as in direction, where to go and whatnot.
Look, thank you. Look, Mr. Chair, I know I've got tons of questions, and I know we're cramped for time, so I won't ask today, but I may follow up with our presenters and maybe have an opportunity to chat with even Brad English on Friday on some of these things. The slide presentation, can that be shared with us, Mr. Chair? Okay, I say yes. Thank you both. I appreciate it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Well, I guess we have to make sure that it's okay with Bernard and Milena. Is it all right if we share your presentation with councillors?
Oh, share all you please. You would be doing us a most honorable favor. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a work plan that I really wanted, Mr. Chair. So.
Yeah, perfect. And we have a question from Councillor Russell. Councillor Russell.
Thank you very much. I was intrigued by one of the slides. You had the picture of the electric car, and you were saying that an APS would help out with that. I can certainly understand how they would let you know when the signaling was right for you to cross the street, but I'm not certain how it would make things better if there is an electric car, if there's a car that makes no noise.
May I answer that?
Go ahead.
Bernard.
Go ahead.
Well, if you imagine if there's no APS, and then you have to listen to the traffic to indicate if you should be crossing or not, and if you can't hear the car, that's what, when there's no APS, you try to do is listen for the traffic when to cross. And if you can't hear the car,
okay,
you can figure out where to go.
So in that case, you would be looking for the car to be respecting the signals that are there, and the APS would help out with that. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Russell. Deputy Mayor Outfit.
Just very quickly, Mr. Chair, obviously I appreciate the presentation and I thank the presenters. If we want to add our support to this, obviously this has been presented to us, and I think generally speaking, we would probably want to support the work plan and their request, for example, to inspect these more often. Do you need a motion that we accept and support their recommendations? Do we just want to send this off to TPW? What would you advise you or the clerk to, how we could sort of show our support for this presentation? That's a mouthful, sorry.
It has been a long week, Deputy Mayor. So what I would suggest is that a motion to share this with Budget Committee, since we're going, luckily Councillor Russell has arranged for us to have another TPW discussion tomorrow. So thank you for that, Councillor. So perhaps a motion, Deputy Mayor, to forward this presentation to Budget Committee.
I think I'd be happy to move that this be forwarded to Budget Committee for discussion and consideration.
Second by Mancini.
Moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion on the motion to forward this to Budget Committee?
Question?
Seeing none, question's been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have a question.
Did we cut off Becky? Sorry.
We can continue to ask questions, Chair, Vice Chair Kent. Was your question pertaining to the vote, or was it pertaining to the presentation?
To the vote.
All right, so we're pausing the vote while Councillor Kent asks her question. Go ahead, Councillor Kent.
I think that if we're going to move it to the Budget Committee, what is ultimately potentially come out of it is a briefing note of some sort, because it may not have enough information for the deliberation and consideration. Is there anything we can do at this time that could proactively move forward with something more relevant to the budget deliberation from staff before it gets to budget, or not necessarily before, but get ahead of it?
I think the problem is that the TPW is meeting again on Friday. Becky, I don't know how much time we have to do much. Yeah.
We can ask for.
Just wondering if we could ask for information, then yeah.
Even though TPW is coming on Friday, we can ask for a briefing note on any subject at any time, and it'll come back with the budget adjustment list discussion when we talk about it later on in April.
I think that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The place to ask for it to be included in the budget list would be at the budget committee, not a transportation standing committee. So by forwarding it, it means tomorrow that we can ask it to be, the request be added to the balance list, as Councillor Russell just said. But I don't think we can do that from here, and I don't think we do it fast enough to have it for consideration tomorrow. Out of respect to Brad's staff. So with that, is that adequate, Councillor Kent? That do you have any further questions, or should we go ahead with the vote?
Well, I'm certainly supportive of the vote. I was just trying to make sure that if there was any way for us to move a little further into the collection of information early for budget debate later, then if what I'm hearing from you as my colleagues is that no, that's not the right process, I accept that.
All right, thank you, Councillor Kent. Are there any further questions before we vote on the motion?
If I may add just 5 seconds, maybe not 5 seconds, we'll see. You are, thank you, Wei. You are free to bring it up as a point of discussion through the meeting tomorrow, and so we would be able to talk with Mr. Koutrelakis and Mr. Anguish about it at that time, and then request a briefing note. So they will have a heads up that it's coming. The briefing note we would get back in the regular schedule of the rest of the briefing notes.
The critical thing is that we get this there for tomorrow so we can have these discussions. That's why I moved.
Yep.
All right, so seeing no further discussion on the question, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Carries unanimously. Are there any further questions for our guests? Seeing none, I'd like to thank Melina and Bernard. I'd like to thank you so much for coming today, and I look forward to being in the same space with you again sometime. It's been a while, so thank you for this virtual visit, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your time, everyone, as well. I'm going to go play some Prince now.
Right on. Okay, thank you both. So moving on, there are no, item 11, there are no information items brought forward. So that brings us to 12 reports, 12.1 staff reports, and 12.11 Herring Cove Functional Plan. We have a staff presentation. I believe Harrison McGrath is on the line ready to bring that forward. Harrison, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
We can, and your presentation is up.
Great. Good afternoon, Transportation Standing Committee. My name is Harrison McGrath, Program Engineer with Strategic Transportation Planning. This presentation is about the Herring Cove Road, bus lane, and transportation infrastructure. Next slide, please. So this project was first initiated with the adoption of the Integrated Mobility Plan back in December 2017. Action 121 of the IMP calls for the development of strategic corridor plans for existing roadways that are key to regional traffic flow, transit, goods movement, and active transportation. So Herring Cove Road definitely fits that description. Next slide, please. So the project objectives was to provide a long-term corridor-wide vision for Herring Cove Road, identify and understand potential options to reconfigure the corridor to improve quality and consistency of transportation for all users, evaluate recommended modifications and changes through the pillars of the Integrated Mobility Plan, and to complete functional design for selected corridors, reconfiguration options that enable strong understanding around the property requirements and construction cost implications. Next slide, please. So just a bit around the project timeline. This report covers 3 projects that have all looked at Herring Cove Road over the last couple of years. So back in 2018, we started with a functional design plan. So that was 30% design, and it started at the Armdale Roundabout and ended at Civic 554, just south of Greystone Drive. So in the 30% design, we're really looking at kind of high-level 2D design options. What kind of infrastructure as far as sidewalks, bike lanes, what type of bike lanes, transit lanes, and intersection configuration. So that project was completed in fall of 2019. After that project, the rapid transit strategy had started. So that, which is our regional higher order transportation strategy that covers both bus rapid transit and additional ferry service. And we also had after that, we had the Herring Cove Road preliminary design, which was a 60% design project, which we focused on the section between Armdale Roundabout and Glenora Avenue. So we just did that shorter section because of the difficulty of the area with the topography, various retaining walls and steep slopes. There's a lot of utility conflicts that are pretty difficult to understand. So we took the 30% design, integrated the changes recommended from the rapid transit strategy, and then did a further 60% design, which was completed in fall of last year. Next slide, please. So a bit about Herring Cove Road and what we were looking at with the existing conditions. Our study area was about 5.5 kilometers. There were 2 sections of the road that have disconnected sidewalks. One of those was completed with a capital project last year around Greystone to the south. There's one remaining sidewalk gap on the east side of the road between Glenora Avenue and Old Samborough Road. So these sidewalk gaps make it difficult for pedestrians to get around, to get to bus stops especially is a concern that we've had. There's limited cycling infrastructure. So the project last year around Greystone Drive added some painted bike lanes at the southern extent of the road, but we are looking for fully connected cycling infrastructure along the corridor. There are 5 bus routes that travel on Herring Cove Road and up to 24 buses per hour in the peak hours. The 3 primary routes, I believe, are the 9, 14, and 32, which between 2018 and 2019, we saw around a 9% increase in transit ridership. So there is pretty strong transit ridership along the corridor. And there's still also a lot of vehicles that travel on the corridor. We're seeing up to 34,000 vehicles per day pre-pandemic, and it's pretty notable, the congestion, especially near or heading into the Armdale Rotary in the morning peak. And we also have limited right-of-way through here. So the plans that we've developed show kind of where the pinch points are and where we'll need to acquire land. That also limits what we can do for the corridor in the future. Next slide, please. So here's a few pictures of just various sections of Herring Cove Road. These kind of show the inconsistent cross-section in infrastructure throughout the corridor. So in the top left is a picture near the Armdale Roundabout. It's kind of a unique section with 3 lanes of traffic and reversing center lane. We have concrete sidewalk on one side that's abutting the road and just an asphalt sidewalk on the opposite side. To the top right is a picture between Glenora Avenue and Old Samborough Road. There's 3 lanes of traffic with 2 outbound and 1 inbound, sidewalk on one side and just a paved shoulder on the right side or east side. So this is a section that is our remaining sidewalk gap along the corridor. So as you can see, there's a transit stop there. People are just kind of walking on the shoulder to get there, and it's a very busy road, especially at this location. You can see the Irving, and there's a Tim Hortons there on the left side. So one thing that we see that is a safety concern is if there's a vehicle trying to turn left and holding up traffic, some vehicles will actually go around them and use the shoulder to pass, which presents a pretty serious opportunity for conflict between vehicles and pedestrians. In the bottom left is a picture near Dentith Road, between Dentith and William Lake Road. This is the more commercial Main Street area of Herring Cove Road. So we have a 5-lane cross section with a center 2-way left turn lane, sidewalks on both sides, and there is a bit of streetscaping that has been done in the past with the landscape boulevards. And then the final picture to the bottom right, that's further out past Sussex Street between Sussex and Greystone. So an area that has a fair amount of residential, but does offer kind of mixed use and commercial properties as well. This is our widest section of the road. Some people kind of say it's built more like a highway, but this is the area that has the highest capacity and is actually kind of the lower end of traffic volumes. Next slide, please. So one thing that has been evaluated through these plans is the development potential. In the recent years, we have seen a fair amount of development at the outer extent of the project area. So highlighted in red is the urban service boundary. There are potential for about 2,300 units to be added within the urban service, most of which have some conceptual designs or development applications ongoing. One thing that we've seen through other jurisdictions in
Appear to have lost Harrison. Can anyone hear me?
I can hear
Yes.
you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think Harrison's frozen.
Well, let's.
Well, there are cutbacks in HRM, so that explains a lot, but he's frozen.
Who's his backup?
The joke you would have made 10 years ago is smoke him if you got him, but don't do that. That's bad for you. Don't do that.
Don't do that, no.
But it's now legal. But we had the same issues this morning with the Audit and Finance Standing Committee, where various portions of the internet around HRM just went poof.
Harrison is leaving the meeting and rejoining the meeting. He may not even know that we can't hear him.
No, he's frozen.
All right, well, we'll pause this meeting. Let's consider this a recess until Harrison rejoins us. So if anybody needs to go get a snack or refill their water, now's a good time.
Everybody do 40 push-ups.
Video or it didn't happen. So for the committee and any public who are watching, Tanya Davis from IMP Group says that they have lost internet and it is totally down at the office.
Well, can we go on to the next agenda item then, Mr. Chair? You come back.
Are the staff here for the improvements in Devonshire, or are they also working out Alderney?
The answer's that, I guess.
Did we lose everybody?
Yeah, well, so what Tanya's saying, Tanya Davis, who runs the Integrated Mobility Group, says that they've lost that, they're all at Alderney and they have lost the internet connection. They're going to try and shut that down and restart, whatever that means. I don't know that staff have the keys to the closet to restart the internet. But this is what happened with Paul earlier today. He was telling me is that everyone inside of HRM lost access, but people outside of HRM were fine. Like I'm at home right now.
Well, when they said on Twitter someday the internet was going to crash, they were right, eh?
It's Y2K. It's just 20 years late.
21.
Kelly Denty says it looks like it's the Wi-Fi.
So I wonder, Mr. Chair, because sometimes we might lose the Wi-Fi, but if people are at City Hall or perhaps at Alderney, if you hardwire, so if you actually have a physical wire to plug into your computer, that might help with the connection. And Harrison is back.
So Dave Rigi just says that you see that they've lost Wi-Fi and hard connections, so that is an HRM-wide issue. I hear, is Harrison, are you back in?
Yes, I believe I'm back. Can you hear me?
We can. So with the development potential slide is where things went sideways. So if you want to go back to the start of that, all the councils are still here, I think. Andrea, do we have a lawyer? We would have probably lost the lawyer too. Colin, are you on?
I think Taylor's still showing as being in the meeting. Taylor, can you please confirm that? Colin, can you please confirm that?
Colin, yeah, he did. So we're good. So, all right, Harrison, let's, while we still have you before it goes down again, let's continue.
Okay, sorry about that. I'll pick up here again. So
hardly your fault, Harrison.
Yeah. So during these studies, we looked at our development potential in the area. We've seen in recent years there has been a lot of development in this Ryfield area. This red area shows the existing urban service boundary, and there's potential for around 2,300 units to be added along or within this area. And that's through multiple subdivisions that we have ongoing conceptual plans for. One thing that we've seen historically from other jurisdictions across North America is when planning for this amount of development, historically we've just widened the roads to increase vehicle capacity. What that does is as more capacity is opened up, it's easier to drive, and the congestion, the traffic kind of fills in that capacity that's opened up. So the IMP promotes developing sustainable transportation modes. So that's walking, cycling, and rolling, transit, even carpooling. Next slide, please. So here's a picture of, this is a picture out of the Active Transportation Priority Plan. Heron Cove Road in the purple is outlined or designated as a desired bikeway, type to be determined. So this was the type to be determined was applied to roads that there wasn't necessarily an easy fix, whether that's to add a multi-use path, painted bike lanes, or protected cycling lanes. So that's something that we had to kind of evaluate and figure out during the study. Our top priority was to complete the gaps in the sidewalks and upgrade asphalt to concrete sidewalks that meet today's standards, to add protected cycling lane or protected cycling infrastructure along the corridor, and to address pedestrian and traffic safety concerns. Has been a lot of safety concerns brought to our attention by the public around just the amount of traffic, poor lack of pedestrian crossings, and high traffic speeds. Next slide, please. So another objective of the functional plan was to provide transit priority. The integrated mobility plan identified a portion of Heron Cove Road, as you can see in the red in the photo, between Cowie Hill Road and the Armdale Roundabout as a transit priority corridor. So this is where transit priority measures like transit lanes, dedicated transit lanes, or Q bypass lanes, transit signals, should be added to prioritize the movement of transit over private vehicle. Next slide, please. So here's a example cross section. There are a number of cross sections developed during the functional plan, but this one is a good representation of the corridor. We've added fully connected and concrete sidewalks on both sides of the road. We've added a raised cycle track. So this would be protected and raised, so it puts cyclists at just raises them up so they're in the field of view of the drivers better, and has the curb there so that they have their dedicated space. We did have to use a multi-use path between the Armdale Roundabout and Cowie Hill Road just due to the lack of space and the topography. We were going to end up having to reinstall and increase the size of retaining walls along that section. And a transit priority lane was added inbound between Cowie Hill Road and the Armdale Roundabout. Next slide, please. We did 2 public engagement sessions for the functional plan. They were pretty well attended. We had 155 open house attendees between the 2 phases. 985 online surveys were completed, and we had 3,530 webpage visits. So a few of the questions we asked were around how people currently use Heron Cove Road and what they would like to see improved. So we did find that the majority of people do use Heron Cove as drivers, but a fair amount of people either walk, cycle, or use transit frequently or occasionally. So sometimes that's commuting, but also to do local trips. There's a number of local shops and businesses, as well as services along Heron Cove Road that are used. And we heard from the public that they'd like to see active transportation and transit infrastructure improved so that they can access both local trips and commuting trips to downtown easier. Next slide, please. In general, the projects or the public supported the new sidewalks, bike lanes, and transit priority where possible. One of I'd say the top concern we did have was around vehicle congestion, especially with the increased development. But what we found was a lot of people said that if the infrastructure went in, they would definitely use it. So we're seeing 60 and 61% for pedestrian infrastructure, and almost 50% for transit infrastructure. Next slide, please. So after the completion of the 30% functional plan, the rapid transit strategy was initiated. The one of 4 lines is the yellow line shown on the page that travels from Greystone right down to downtown Halifax. So the sections that are outlined in blue represent areas where transit priority lanes were recommended out of the rapid transit strategy. So a fair amount of the corridor is recommended for transit lanes, which is an increase compared to what the IMP was originally recommending. But this is just the higher order transit strategy is kind of above what the IMP had done. So in order to incorporate these changes to the corridor, we had to go back and revise the functional plan. Next slide, please. So just a brief explanation of the changes between rapid transit and our typical transit service. Rapid transit would operate high frequency, around 10-minute headways, and all-day service. So with our existing service, we increase frequency during peak hours, but not necessarily off-peak. So rapid transit would be high service all day. And with the added infrastructure, our travel times would be more competitive with private vehicles. The graphic below shows the difference between BRT and existing bus service during peak hours, as well as off-peak hours. So in each section, we're seeing 6 minutes to 2 minutes, but which is a fair amount, especially when you add it together along the corridor. We're seeing around a 10-minute time savings between Greystone and Scotia Square. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, with the rapid transit strategy changes, we had to do a secondary, what we call the preliminary design. The preliminary design was a 60% design, so it increased in detail from the 30% and then included some changes to incorporate the additional bus lanes. The first phase is all we've done to date, which was completed in September 2020, and it's just between the Armdale Roundabout and Glenora Avenue, which is the red section in the photo to the right. Within that section, there was minimal changes to the functional design. Some minor changes with the multi-use path in the first functional design went between the roundabout and Cowie Hill, and now we're extending that to Glenora Avenue. And this was due to just the available right-of-way and space that we have to add the additional bike lanes. Within this section, we don't actually reduce vehicle capacity. All all the infrastructure is done through widening, but as the phase progresses, we may have to look at that. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, phase 2 will likely result in some reductions in vehicle capacity in some areas in favor of cycling and transit. Phase 2 we are looking to is included in this year's capital plan, so we are looking to initiate that section very shortly. And during that review, we will be reviewing the as-of-right developments, so the 2,300 units that I mentioned before, as well as the potential for additional lands that are currently within holding zones and urban reserve. Next slide, please. So we have several cost estimates here. It's important to note that, so for the functional plan, we had a total cost estimate of 21.6 million. The preliminary design for phase 1 is between 10.3 and 12.6, but the preliminary design is included in the functional plan. So the 10.3 and 12.6 aren't in addition to the 21.6. And as we complete the preliminary design for the remainder of the study area, we'll have a more detailed cost estimate. These costs are also included in the cost of implementing the approved rapid transit strategy, and they do not include property acquisitions costs. Next slide, please. So we have several funding opportunities for this project. A couple months ago, the federal government announced $14.9 billion in funding for public transit over the next 8 years. We don't have details on how that is being distributed across the country, but it's expected that we would receive some funding for public transit. In September 2020, our application for ICIP funding, that's Infrastructure or Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, was approved by Regional Council and submitted to the province. That is still pending, but I believe that's around $10 million that was requested for this project. One thing to note is federal funding cannot be used for purchasing land. So in order to receive the full benefit of this federal funding, land acquisition would need to take place in advance and would be at the cost of HRM. Next slide, please. So just here's the recommendation that's within the council report. So it's recommended that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council direct the CAO to endorse the Herring Cove Road functional plan and further integrate with the recommendations of the recently approved rapid transit strategy. And 2, to initiate efforts to acquire property to widen various sections of Herring Cove Road to accommodate dedicated active transportation and transit infrastructure. Next slide, please. So for next steps, if the Transportation Standing Committee and Regional Council approve the staff recommendation, we will initiate or issue an RFP for the preliminary design for phase 2 between Glenora and Greystone Drive, which is included in this year's capital budget. And we will begin to program detailed design, land acquisition, and construction to be phased over the next 5 to 10 years. So all of the planning and design is programmed in advance of that, but in order to construct this, the 5.5 kilometers, it would be a multi-year project completed in sections over those years. And I believe that's it. That's all for the presentation.
Thank you, Harrison. You're a trooper hanging in there as the internet let us all down. So who I have on the list right now is Deputy Mayor Outfit, followed by Councillor Cuddle, and then Councillor Cleary will go to Deputy Mayor first to put the motion on the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm happy to put the motion on the floor. And thank you, Harrison, for the presentation. It's certainly exciting and reminds me a little bit of the Bedford Highway functional plan that I also strongly support and want to see moving forward. So I'm going to put the motion on the floor that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to 1, endorse the Herring Cove Road functional plan and further integrate with the recommendations of the recently approved Rapid Transit Strategy of 2020, and 2, initiate efforts to acquire property to widen various sections of Herring Cove Road to accommodate dedicated active transportation and transit infrastructure. So moved.
Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by
I will second that, Councillor Russell.
Seconded by
And
Councillor Russell.
Mr. Chair, what I want to do today is we want to have this discussion, we're glad to have this presentation. We're going to have a discussion, any questions, and then I'm going to move that we defer any vote on this. One of our new colleagues has requested we defer the decision on this and the vote until she has a month to read the decision, talk to some stakeholders, and solicit some feedback from some folks in her portion of this infrastructure. So, do you? I guess the motion to defer would be made again after we've had some discussion. But I'm serving notice that I will be moving to defer.
I'll come back to you close and you
All
can
right.
make the deferral at that time. Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor.
My pleasure.
So,
Thank you.
got anything further?
No, I'm excited about this and look forward to seeing it going forward. But I know there's others that have a lot of questions.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. We'll go to Councillor Cuttle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Deputy Mayor Elhit, for putting the motion on the floor and the deferral. I just want to say that thank you, Harrison, for the presentation. When this report landed on my desk, it actually didn't land on my desk, it landed in my inbox, 600 pages. It was a very, very in-depth report with lots of information. And noting that this did start back in 2018, I know that there's a lot of work that has been done over the years on it, including a lot of public consultation. And so I am just hoping that the committee will vote to defer this until the next meeting to provide an opportunity for other members of the public to see this recorded presentation, which helps. I think it really helps a lot of people get into this report. I think that, something like this is hard for the general public to really look at and respond to. And I just want to make sure that we do our due diligence in connecting with those stakeholders and having a proper read of the report, which was not able to happen this week given the kind of very full agendas we've had. So thank you very much, and I will pass it over to anyone else who has questions.
Thank you. We'll go to the other Herring Cove councillor, road councillor, Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a bunch of questions, but first some preliminary comments, and I've been able to make my way through most of it, skipping over, of course, a lot of the traffic counts. I trust you're gathering the data quite well. So phase one of this is entirely in District 9, and a good chunk of the plan is entirely in District 9. So when I look at those sections of Herring Cove Road, obviously one of the big things with the realignment of Herring Cove Road and Purcell's Cove Road, where that intersection comes, is a huge improvement. And I can't overstate that. The realignment of that intersection, the way it comes to Herring Cove Road, making it more of a T intersection, the bump outs that are there, and given the width and the restrictions of the road as you come down to the approach to the rotary, I totally get the, and I'm fine with going from the bike lanes to an active transportation trail, because at least it continues to have the infrastructure for safe passage for cyclists and pedestrians. And I'm excited. Oh my God, am I ever excited about the transit priority measures that are here, the bus lanes, the queue jumps, all of those things that are coming through here to really make, and especially as rapid transit goes in and that yellow line comes through Herring Cove Road into Spryfield, it will make transit competitive with private vehicles, and that is super exciting because the number 9 A and B, as people know, is now the second most ridden route in all of Halifax. And when the Moving Forward Together plan came in, transit ridership year over year over year, except for COVID, obviously, we saw massive increases, double-digit increases in transit ridership on that route compared to the old routes that were there. So I have a couple of questions around capacity in terms of staff, and I also have a question with regard to the delay that Councillor Outhitt and Councillor Cuttle mentioned earlier, because one of the things I did notice in here, and Harrison talked about this, is phase one being included in the 21-22 budget. And so if there's a delay for a month, I'm wondering if staff can just speak to the impact that that would have to keep coming forward into our budget discussions and be included. Does this have to be passed by this committee and moved to regional council at a certain date in order for us to pass this through our budget?
I'm not sure this is really in Harrison's wheelhouse to be articulate on that. Is there anybody on the call who feels comfortable trying to articulate that? It might be. I mean, if you have the answer, Harrison, don't let me shut you down.
So, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, the budget that is there for what would be phase two of the preliminary design is it's capital budget, so it could roll over into following years. We would be delayed by a month, but we could just delay that.
Okay,
yeah,
so we could still make it in.
Yeah, my read on it, councillor, is that we've created the reservation, as it were, by passing the capital budget already, and it will be there for whenever we get this approved.
Okay, so then my second question then is around staff capacity. We have a lot of projects on the go. Councillor Outhit mentioned the Bedford functional plan, the Bedford Highway functional plan. We have Councillor Mason mentioned this at our meeting yesterday with regard to cycling infrastructure in the urban core and getting that minimum grid. We're really stretching to get things done. We have to apply for federal funding. We have to get the tenders out. There's still 60% design to be done for a huge portion of this. And I'm not sure if we have senior folk from TPW or planning and development here, but like I'm concerned about horsepower. Like we, as a municipality, I think we're doing incredibly well. We're punching above our weight. We can only do that for so long before it becomes unsustainable. So I'm looking for maybe some sort of confidence level in terms of our ability to get this done. It's a long time frame, but in that time frame.
Mr. Chair, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Peter.
Yeah, it's Peter Duncan, Manager of Infrastructure Planning. I'm in the room here with Harrison. I concede the point that there is a definite challenge around resources. We're trying to stand the overall program up, though, and we're certainly aware that we have to integrate our work with the work of Transportation and Public Works. We are working on a resource plan, and this may be a better conversation to have when P&D comes back with their operating budget presentation on the 7th, I think.
Okay, I appreciate that, Mr. Duncan. I appreciate that, Mr. McGrath. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Stoddard. You're still muted, I think, there, Councillor Stoddard, if you're with us.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
There you are.
Being new to this subject, I just had a couple of questions, please. I'd like to know when the open houses, I think it was plural, were done, and when the online survey was done, please.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. I believe the open houses were completed in February of 2019 and March of 2019, March or April. So they're both winter and spring of 2019. There was additional public engagement done with the rapid transit strategy. We did not do additional engagement on top of that for phase one of the preliminary design because it more or less encompassed what was done in the functional plan. As we progress into phase two of the preliminary design, the remaining portion of the planning, we would go back out for public engagement.
What about the online surveys? Were they done as part of getting customer feedback?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. The online surveys were done in conjunction with the open houses. They were done as kind of a phase, so we'd have the open house, the information would be available online, and the surveys were posted for 2 weeks during each phase.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Harrison. So seeing no further questions, if I may, I'll speak from the chair. Harrison, quick one is, I lost this thread a little bit when you talked about the 21.6 million and the up to 12.6 million. Are you saying that the 12.6 million for the functional plan is on top, or that was incorporated inside of? I didn't quite grab it. I faded out for a minute.
Yeah, so the 21.6 was for the entire corridor, and that was, I believe, a Class D estimate.
Mhm.
So the preliminary design, the 12.6 was included in that estimate.
All right.
So
Okay, thank you.
it's double counted.
That's great. So, I mean, to me, I think this is a great plan. I look forward to hearing more about it from the area councilors at the next meeting. You know, my concerns are more around the horsepower issue that's already been identified. You know, one question for me is when we say we're going to be doing functional design and purchasing land for 4 years, I don't think that's fast enough, which goes to horsepower in terms of purchasing and staff. When the city, and this is what I'm going to talk about in the TPW debate on Friday, is you know, I think Mr. Duncan's unit and Ann Sherwood's unit don't have enough people to do what we need to do so that we have these things in place so that we can meet our regional plan growth goals and accommodate a population of 550,000 people by 2030. I don't want to be building the Herring Cove Road to this standard in 2027, right? I think that's too late. And so I think we need to talk about capacity on the staff side, but we need to, you know, and while also during the strategic funding discussion that's coming in June that Ms. Fraser's talked about, potentially looking at Bedford Highway, Portland Street, Windsor Street Exchange, and Herring Cove Road, and looking at how we can expedite these, because I think that the danger is they all end up waiting until Cogswell's done, and we only do one at a time, and that we're still doing things that we know we need right now in 15 years. And I don't think, I don't want to set that up. I think that's bad. So another question for you though, you know, talking about capacity and speed, I guess my big questions are, you know, and I also want to act on this because I've been like from the beginning, the stuff around the Herring Cove market was great and I supported it, but we didn't make that crosswalk as safe as it should have been because we still have cars that can pass in the bike lanes because we didn't do a physical divider between the cycle track and the road. So to me, the question is, are we talking like is the staff recommendation to go to the ultimate solution and skip the interim solution? Or are we talking about studying it more and maybe doing the interim solution in the staff report? You know, is the 21.6 million bucks to do the ultimate solution, the ultimate proposal that's in that report? And, you know, the second question, which probably can't be answered today, Harrison, but good thing we're coming back in a month, is what are our options for speeding it up? If we were just going to borrow the money and build this and Bedford Highway and Windsor Street Exchange, you know, sure, we can't probably do them all at once, but we certainly would need more capacity to do them faster. And we would have to kind of measure how many roads do you want under construction at the same time. But what is the time frame just for this one? If we decided we want to go to the ultimate and do it faster, how, you know, like, is that something that could be done in 3 or 4 years instead of 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years? So those are my two questions. What's the end state we're looking to build here? And are we looking at not doing an interim step? And how fast could we get it done if we decided to do that?
So, Mr. Chair, for your first question around the interim and ultimate, we've ruled out the interim and are just proceeding to the ultimate, and saying that the ultimate that we're looking to get to is different than what's in the functional plan, because it'll include those transit lanes in both directions. Right. As far as the capacity and our ability to deliver faster, I think that's something that we can probably take away and get back to you around any options there may be to do that.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is going to be a discussion in this committee, in budget tomorrow, in the strategic planning, and probably in budget, obviously in budget when planning comes back, because I feel if more resources are required to achieve our goals, our big, hairy, audacious goals, that we need to hear that from staff, and we need to have that discussion as a council at budget. So we now have Councillor Kent and then Cuddle for her second go, and then we'll go to Councillor Headed for a deferral. So Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wow, I think this is the biggest report I've ever seen. 600 pages, and it's a lot, I can imagine, for Councillor Cuddle and any of the newer councillors to wrap their heads around, as I'm only just feeling very grateful for the fact that I'm getting in at the bottom end of the beginning end of something that might be happening over in the Dartmouth side. So what I want to know, like, I'm a little unsure what's going to be wrapped around a deferral. We're not really debating that yet. I know we're just asking questions. My big concern with, as we go forward here, if we, I need to know that these councillors who have the most impact within their districts are going to have still have lots of opportunity to influence the outcome and have their opportunities for questions if we move anything forward here. I know Councillor Cuddle is here. And I see Councillor Cleary. I don't know who else might have an impact on this one. So that's just. I don't quite know. I want to make sure that when we have something on the floor here, are we? Yeah, I feel like I'm lost.
Well, so I think the plan right now is we defer, and that means if we defer, that means it's public for a month.
Yes.
And then it comes back here for further debate, and then it is still being recommended to regional council, so all of council has a chance to debate, which I think is important also, because obviously something like the Heron Cove functional plan, if it doesn't happen in a timely fashion, that it impacts bus rapid transit, and that impacts everybody up and down the line, including my district. Right, that's where it about a third of the yellow line runs through District 7. So we all have an interest in seeing this come forward, but this will now give 4 weeks till the next meeting on this, and then 2, 3, 4 weeks before it goes to regional council. So that, two more months of discussion.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, and I'm still anxious to hear from Councillor Cuddle and Councillor Cleary. Thank you.
Great. Okay, Councillor Cuddle for your second go. You're still muted there.
Muted, and I'm not even on video. There we go. Yeah, I thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and thank you, Becky, for your support there. It is a lot to wrap one's head about, especially when we're talking about phased implementation, things like ultimate design. Like, I'm not even sure, from what's here right now and what I have been able to read, like what really are the implications of the ultimate design, and what does that mean for the street as a whole. So I do realize that this is the report that is looking to advance more work on this. I'm just wondering, like, when like this report, we're talking about like 30%, 50%, like where would this report figure into the bigger picture of work in terms of the percentage of work that's getting done? Is it 10%, 50%? I'm not sure. That would be for Harrison.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, in terms of this like what work's been done to get to construction, is that kind of what you're looking for?
In the process to getting to the end product, yeah. Is this report, just if you could just tell me a little bit about what the process is, like from here forward, or from from the beginning till now, moving forward, and what is what stage are we at?
I don't know if I could put a percentage on it. Our process for our kind of functional plans and major changes to road corridors, we begin with a 30% design. That's just kind of 2D and to see what we can do. In more complicated projects like this one, we get into 60% as just a kind of interim phase between before going directly to detailed design, and that gives us the information around property acquisitions, that type of information. So right now we have half of the 60% design done. Our next steps would be to complete the 60% design and then do detailed design, which would also need to be phased in various sections before tendering and also phasing construction.
So is this report then considered 60% design? Where's the 60% design? Now, like, where would one be able to look at that?
Through Mr. Chair to the councillor, we don't, the 60% design itself are like engineering design drawings, so it's not something that we typically attach to the report itself.
Okay, will there be an opportunity for, I know we can't have any, big public consultations at the moment, but I'm just thinking there'd be some real value in having some of those design boards of the 60% design brought back to the public and kind of shown to the public about, like, here's what we're thinking and here's how we're moving forward. Because I find, the details in here, particularly the drawings, I mean, they're just examples of, they're not necessarily, here's what's happening where. So I'm just wondering, when is the opportunity for us to see what is actually being proposed in terms of design?
So through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, so the 60% design that we've completed to date is more or less what the 30% ultimate is. So those have been shown to the public, but in our next phase of the project, when we go back out to the public, we would have some of those, the 60% design would kind of be those public display boards that we typically have at open houses or virtual meetings. So we would be showing the full design to the public at that point.
Where's the 30% design drawings?
30% design drawings, I believe, are included in attachment B, I believe, of the report.
Okay, we're coming up on time there.
Okay, that's nice. So I'll be in touch, Harrison, I guess over the next month, probably with some more questions for you, just in terms of finding the details of the report, if that's all right. Thanks.
Oh, and Councillor Cleary's checked in for his second go. Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just so for some of our new councillors who may not be familiar with the terminology, and for the public, and Harrison, correct me when I go astray here, but when we talk about things like 30, 60, 90% design, it's the level of accuracy and sophistication that the engineers have as they approach this. So if you look, for example, in the report on page 282, you can see a design for the bus lanes, the vehicle lanes, the bicycle lanes at Cowie Hill and Herring Cove Road, showing things like the bus stop, car movements, where the lanes would be. And so at that stage, measurements have been made, site visits have been done, people have an idea of what's realistic, what can fit in there, those kind of things. So I forget which parts, but phase one is at 60% design, I think, as indicated in the report. And then the other portions from Glenora further towards up Herring Cove Road towards Spryfield are still at 30. And so I don't want to say they're conceptual, but they're not as accurate as they would be, and more design work has to go into them. And when the engineers go to detailed design, then they're actually getting into by the millimeter where things go, how much gravel you're putting in, here's the design, and it's like, and the cost estimates get closer to more accurate than the Class D estimates that we often see at early design stage. And so when you're going through this, it is a lot of information, but when you're scanning through the report, a huge amount of it we don't need to read unless you're really interested in knowing the traffic counts and the vehicle movements and the numbers of vehicles making those movements at each of those areas. But the big things to pay attention to are those multicolored graphics for the design of the road, showing you, for example, that Cowie Hill and Herring Cove, where you see the bike lanes then transition to an active transportation trail. So that leads me to a question. So for Mr. Harrison, through you, Mr. Chair, when you get to something like that, and it's not inherent in the actual design that we see in the picture, how does one, and are we still working on that transition? So how do you get from, if you're going to a bi-directional AT trail, how do you get from the bike lane to the AT trail? Because I believe we're still waiting for things like cross rides from the province. So are some of these kind of still, this is where the transition is going to be, not sure how we're going to make it, or do we have some idea at this point how a bicycle rider, for example, would get from that bike lane to the AT trail and having to cross the street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor. So in the 60% design, we actually moved that transition from Cowie Hill to Glenora, but it will be a similar situation. There is an RA5 at Glenora, so you see the push button with the overhead lighting. So as our worst case scenario, that is what we would use. But details around that, the transition would be determined as we progress the 60% design above Glenora or below Glenora, and see what type of infrastructure is connecting into that. And as you mentioned, some of that is dependent on potential changes to provincial legislature around things like cross rides.
Right, and so if you could indulge me just for one more second, Mr. Chair. So the Glenora one, as I recall, that's not a signalized intersection. You said that's an RA5, so that's just a crosswalk. And so that is where that transition would happen under your current design.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. So I guess my just for clarity, given the discussion that just happened with the last two councillors, is given that this isn't a full 60% plan, and we're not directing you to go ahead and complete a 100% plan and put it out to tender, the phase one would still come back to TSC and to council before construction. Is that correct? Like there's still more engagement, even if this went forward today and went to council. We're not done with council talking about it. Is that correct?
Yes, we would return with the full 60% design after phase two is complete, and we have the opportunity to do public engagement at that point.
Okay, thank you. And after that, though, we would not see the 100% design for approval. We would say, yes, go ahead and do this. And then the engineers would do their magic things. And that's what goes out to tender. We approve on a 60% design rather than the final design. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right, just for clarity on process for everybody. So we're going to definitely see this again. Well, we'll see it again next month. We'll see it again even after it ends up going to regional council. So last on the list was Councillor Outhitt for a motion to defer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just based on the discussion that we had here, first of all, it was good discussion, and I want to assure Councillor Cleary and others that I would not be doing this if I thought there was any threat to the budget, and that we hadn't had this already sort of earmarked in the capital budget. Wouldn't want to delay it a year. The other thing, I want to strongly support your comments, Mr. Chair, and Sean's about the horsepower and the staffing on this, because you listed a number of projects, but then there's also Cogswell, there's also Bedford Ferry, there's also Bedford Waterfront, there's Windsor Street, there's the regional plan review. I mean, it's really going to be a busy year, and I do wonder about resources as well, and certainly the timing of these that I want to see move forward as well. So I agree with those comments. I'm also a little bit hesitant. Anytime I see Class D estimates, that scares me. Those Class D estimates are even worse than Class C estimates, and it's Class C estimates to scare me. So, obviously there's still a lot to be understood here. So the spirit of this deferral is that we will not vote on this today. It will come back at the next meeting for further discussion and a vote. Patty will have some time to do a review of this and to talk to some stakeholders. But Mr. Chair, I believe you also wanted a little bit of a costing briefing note or a costing discussion on what it might cost to bring it forward sooner or not.
I think I've asked those questions. We can talk about that tomorrow in TBW, and we can talk about that. And, that's going to be a theme carrying forward. So I don't think it needs to be in the motion. So we have a motion to defer.
All right, then I'm just going to move to defer further discussion and the vote on this till the next meeting of the Transportation Standing Committee. So moved.
Okay, I'd ask that be to the next regularly scheduled meeting.
Regular schedule? Okay, that's fine.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Stoddard. Is there any further discussion on the motion to defer?
No, I'm good. Question?
Question's been called. All those in favor of the deferral?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries. All right, 15 minutes left. Let's see if we can get Devonshire done. Apologize to staff for waiting to talk to us about the other weighty thing. Thank you all for that, everyone. We'll move to 12.1.2, improvements to Devonshire Avenue.
You can put that on the floor, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you, Councillor Stoddard.
You're welcome. I move that the Transportation Standing Committee recommend that Halifax Regional Council direct the Chief Administrative Officer to pursue improvements to Devonshire Avenue as described in the discussion section of the March 16th, 2021 report. I so move.
Moved by Councillor Stoddard, seconded by?
Councillor Russell.
By Councillor Russell. Any further? There is no presentation. Dave McCuskey is here to discuss if we wish. Councillor Smith did communicate with me earlier that he had no concerns and it's in his district. So if there's any, is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor?
Favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you all very much. So next on the agenda, sadly for Jody, who's been waiting, is we have the 12.1.3 presentation regarding potential amendments to traffic calming administrative order. I'm wondering if staff, we have to do notices of motion at the end. We've already deferred the added item. I'm wondering, we've already indicated we're going to schedule a meeting between now and the next meeting. This would give us 2 items at a minimum, your presentation and the pedestrian infrastructure. How long is your presentation, or do you want to wait, is the question for staff and for the committee.
Mr. Chair, it's Brad English, Director of Transportation Public Works. We'll defer to the next meeting. Given that you have a hard stop at 3 o'clock and the next meeting you're going to is very critical to TPW as well. So
yeah,
yes, we'll gladly defer. My apologies to Jody, and thanks for your indulgence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to move deferral. I just think that we wouldn't be able to do this justice in 14 minutes. It's such an important issue, so I'm happy to defer this to the next meeting versus the next scheduled meeting.
And I'm happy to second that so that the report that's coming about Lower Sackville doesn't feel lonely.
There you go.
Well, we wouldn't want that. So we have a motion from Deputy Mayor Outfit, seconded by Councillor Russell, that we move 12.1.3 presentation regarding potential amendments to traffic calming administrative order to our next special meeting that will be held probably around April 15th, but we'll work that out with the committee. Is there any further discussion on the motion to defer?
Question?
Question has been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Carries. Thank you very much. And yes, as Mr. English said, sorry about that, Jody, for making you watch all that for the last 2 hours. That's it for added items. That puts us to notices of motion. Do any members of council have a notice of motion? Hearing none, I have one. At a future date of at a future meeting of Transportation Standing Committee, I will move the following. The Transportation Standing Committee requests a staff report to be completed prior to the start of the 2022-2023 budget discussion that outlines options for a program for establishing protected left turn movements and protected right turn movements at signal controlled intersections. The program should prioritize high traffic and pedestrian volume intersections and high conflict intersections. I'll submit that digitally to the clerk as soon as the meeting adjourns. Hearing no other notices of motion, the date of the next meeting is actually going to be probably around April 15th. The next regularly scheduled meeting is April 22nd. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I heard Councillor Stoddard first. You almost had the full house there, Councillor Russell, for housekeeping in seconds. Thank you all. We are adjourned.
Thank you all.
Thanks, staff. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.